have a very exciting presentation for you. I don't want to take up too much time, but basically the overall plan is I'll do little introductions. We'll have a presentation from our land committee, and then we'll have a presentation from Katie and Max. So this is Katie right here. Katie comes to us from Housing Opportunities of Southwest Washington. We'll sometimes refer to them as HOSWA. So if you hear HOSWA, that's Housing Opportunities of Southwest Washington. You might even hear them referred to as Longview Housing Authority. They changed their name a number of years ago, but at least some people still call it that. That's all the same entity, in case that comes up and you get confused. And next to her we have Max. Max is coming from Community Frameworks, providing some of the on-the-ground architectural and design aspects, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what they do. But these are the groups we're looking to potentially partner with, and you'll be hearing more from them about the proposal and the plan in a little bit. And then we'll end with the time for questions. We're going to have a microphone going around. We ask that you speak into the microphone. One, because some people are hard of hearing, and even if you are loud, it's sometimes hard to still hear you. So we ask that you speak into the microphone. And also, we're trying to record this for others to see, so speaking into the microphone will help guarantee that the video camera is able to pick up your sound, so that as we share this with others who might be wondering a similar question, they'll hear you asking that question. I have a handout I'll be passing around in just a minute, or those will pass around. It comes from the feasibility study, and I took a few select pages out of it of the two potential units of 24 and 38, or 24 and 48 units, as well as a demographic study, just to get you started with some information to take home or write notes on if you want. If you want to look at the full feasibility study, which was some 50 or 60 pages long, I have a couple of copies that you can look at, but I can't give them to you because I didn't want to print 50 copies of 50 pages each. It was just too much paper.
We could also provide you with a link to.
And that's right. We now have a PDF version that I can send to you as well if you'd like that full version. Thank you, Jim. The other people you see sitting up here, just in case you don't know them, are Jim Stonier and Renee Ostermiller. These two fine gentlemen have been half of our land committee over the last 3 years, 2.5 years. It's been a fun ride. They keep telling me how much it's been to enjoy. But in all seriousness, it has been a really fun committee to be a part of, to dream about what might happen with that land next door, and to be coming to you today with a proposal for what that might look like. So this meeting is informational only. We'll be providing as much information as we can, answering as many questions as we can. We're not going to be voting on anything here. If we move forward, if everyone seems to be in a little bit of ready, we'll be moving forward to a vote in January at our congregational meeting. That motion will get presented to you 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks before the meeting, or we could even push that back potentially if there's more discussion that needs to be had, but that would be the plan going forward. So this is a chance to gather information. There won't be any votes happening here. Nothing's being decided, just so you have a sense of what we're doing. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Jim or Wayne to give a little bit of background on what the Land Committee has been up to and why we're excited to partner with HOSWA and
Thank you, Dexter. The committee actually is comprised of 5 people. Pastor Dexter is also on that committee. So the other 2 members of the committee who aren't here, Paul Roche and Kathy Thompson, knew about this meeting today and they left town. So we're up here and we'll suffer through the slings and arrows. In any event, as Dexter mentioned early in the service, that it's been some years. It's a process that required a lot of meetings, a lot of discussions. We looked at a lot of ideas. We met with people at CAP, people at HOSWA, and eventually came up with the proposal that we're going to hear about today. organizational meeting, some suggestions. Everything from, well, maybe we should just recommend selling the property, take the funds that we got from the property and use it for something like buying some duplexes. But we were guided by a principle. One of our tenants was that TENETS, not ANTS, was that we not become a landlord. The idea that we would be in charge of units of property where we would have to make hard decisions regarding whether or not people stay as tenants. We didn't want to be in that business or have that responsibility. Just as a church, yeah, I think it would create some problems. So we all very much agreed on that. The other, of course, guiding principle was most of the ideas were really expensive. And we are looking at our resources. Well, we have to go somewhere else to find the resources. So the proposal, so it's right out front, and there is, you can see it in page 2 and 3, it's actually page 6 and 7 of the handout, is that we partner with OSWA and that there be various funding mechanisms to build housing on the 2.5 acres that you see out behind the church, and that there be anywhere from 24 to 48 units constructed for affordable housing, because we've been told don't use low-income housing because that raises all sorts of NIMBY issues. But it's basically for people who have difficulty affording housing. And the proposal would be 24 to 48 units, which would be managed by hospital. In fact, they'd own the property. And that we would be gifting the property with the understanding that far into the future, there would be housing for people who could not afford housing otherwise. And that is the proposal you see in front of you. We met, and actually we were thinking about that fairly early on. We even met with a group at CAP, and they were talking about tax credits, but that particular proposal, we were talking 5-6 years. The metaphor that the presenters had was you have to be a barnacle on a rock in order to hang in there long enough for this to happen. But we much prefer the proposal that we have right now from OSWA. There's no guarantees as to time frames. It's all dependent upon money, raising money either through tax credits, legislature, various grant funds. But having listened to the presentation, and you'll hear that from these wonderful people, Katie and Max, is that it's doable. You know, it's realistically doable that within 2 to 3 years we can see housing out there. And it would be a wonderful opportunity for us and our Christian faith to reach out to people who might need programs that we could provide. The location is wonderful. It's near a school. The idea of having families out there with young children who can walk to the school. So I think I've been pointing out here something. All right? Yeah. The school's over here. Now I'm oriented. All right? But in any event, you know, that's what we worked on. That's what we came up with. This is a proposal. Time frame, we have more detail to put into it. So we hope that maybe we have enough detail that we can actually take it to a congregational vote in January. If not, we'd have to have a special meeting with the congregation. We don't want to wait that long. The faster we can proceed with the I's and the T's, getting them dotted and across, the better. and hopefully get in, if it's money from the legislature, we want to get into the next session if possible. It will also take approval from the presbytery. We know that. Pastor Dexter's already been talking to some of the trustees up there. But it's positive. I think everything's doable. Wayne, did you want to add anything?
Jim, I think you covered it.
Good.
I will say that
I'm gonna have to have microphone.
I will say that to simplify what Jim said, to provide housing for we don't say low income, Jim?
It's affordable housing.
Yeah, to provide affordable housing, you really need two things. One is land, and two is money. So we're kind of zeroing in on those two aspects, and we've got a plan that we'd like to show you and get your reaction to.
And if you do download or get a copy of the entire feasibility study, it's pretty impressive. And what we all know, what you're going to hear a little bit more about today is, in this community, Cowlitz County, Longview, there is a great need for this.
Up next, I believe we have Katie, who will be presenting on some of the needs and the demographic studies that we have of Longview and the surrounding area, some in comparison to other counties as well, and then we'll look more at the specifics of this plan.
Thank you. I'm Katie Bonus. I am the Director of Operations for Housing Opportunities. And what I'm going to show for you today is a lot of demographics. Statistics that our strategic planning consultant has come up with. And we're going to start our strategic planning here soon. So the information that you're going to see today covers all 4 counties of our jurisdiction, but it's pretty powerful stuff. We've got Longview kind of singled out in here. So the other thing that we're going to do today is recognize the value. We're going to recognize the value of supportive services along with housing. Next slide. So this one here is the housing cost burden for the 4 different counties that we operate in, along with the city of Longview. And the light pink is the mortgage cost, greater than 30%. So people who own their housing and are paying more than 30% of their income in rent. And then the dark red is renters who are paying more than 30% of their income in rent. And as you can see, Longview has quite a few people that are cost burdened, just trying to make rent payments. So the next slide is the changes between 2010 and 2017. Longview actually went down, so that's a good thing. The state of Washington as a whole went down. You can see some of our other counties that we incorporate through our jurisdiction, they actually increased in cost burden. So the next slide is individuals in poverty. So the gray is just people in poverty, and then the purple demonstrates deep poverty. And the green is both poverty and over 65. So you can see that Longview has quite a few people who are in poverty, especially compared to the state of Washington as a whole. And it's also more than any of our counties. The next one is a change in between 2010 and 2017. The sad part is that Longview actually increased their people in deep poverty, along with some of our other counties. The next slide has to do with our housing stock here across our counties. So the light blue is the oldest housing that we have, 1939 or earlier, up to 2014 and later. And as you can see, Longview, which is over here on the end over here, doesn't have any new stock from 2014, not enough to show on our graph here. Most of it is older housing stock that we have, which, as a lot of us know in here, requires a lot of upkeep. So the need is there for new housing stock. The next slide has to do with rentals and mobile homes. The dark blue color is rentals, and as you can see in Longview, there are a lot of renters in Longview. The light purple is mobile home rentals. So the city of Longview has more renters than the state as a whole. 37% for the state of Washington and 47% of the people in Longview are renters. And then the next slide is rentals and mobiles, the percentage of change in the last 7 years. Longview has actually increased in renters. The next slide's pretty powerful. It's families in poverty. The green represents the families in poverty, and the blue represents single mothers in poverty. 17% of the households in Longview are at or below poverty level, which when you compare with the entire state of Washington, at only 8%. The next slide has to do with the changes in the last 7 years. Longview actually increased its families in poverty by almost 2%. The state of Washington actually went down. So the next slide has to do with individuals not working. This can be for a variety of reasons. Again, Kelly put this together, so I'm not exactly sure of all the reasons why people were not working. But 33% of the households in Longview were not working, as compared to the state at 22%. Next slide has to do with people with disabilities. So Longview has 25% of its population has some sort of disability. It's kind of, you can kind of see across all four of our jurisdictions, or all four of our counties in our jurisdiction, we're running right around 20 to 25% of disabled folks that live in the counties, as compared to 13% in the state of Washington. Next slide has to do with homelessness. So this is just broken out into counties as opposed to the city of Longview also. The yellow has to do with the total chronic homeless persons. The gray is the total households that are homeless. And then the orange color is the total persons who are homeless in Cowlitz County. And as you can see, Cowlitz County has almost over 400 individuals who are chronically homeless. The next slide has to do with people over the age of 65 that are living alone. Longview has the highest percentage out of all of our jurisdictions here, with 9% of the households 65 or older, and they're living alone. Yes?
Wait a minute, let me get that.
So, when do you consider them chronic, and how long do they have to be homeless?
Is it 3 years? Or Max is going to help.
So there, okay. I can't recite the exact definition, but the definition for chronic homelessness is one of two things. Number one, it's someone who's been homeless for, I believe it's 1 year, or they've been homeless multiple times in a year. And I believe is it 2 or 3 times in a year? So someone ends up on the street, they get housed again, and then they end up back on the street. That happens a couple times, and they call it chronic homelessness. One of the challenges that we have is that, for statistics, the government has a couple of different definitions of homelessness, and that one right there is probably the most sort of stringent, is the toughest to serve people. who really have the hardest time staying in housing. And it ranges from that all the way to the least sort of stringent definition, which is what the school districts use when they measure, say, student homelessness. And that includes people who are sleeping on their couch, friends' couches, and that sort of thing.
Okay, so the last slide that I have for you is households receiving supportive services. So this one shows that folks who are receiving help from the government, the blue is SSI, so folks who are disabled, receiving Social Security. Blue is the public assistance from like food stamps, public assistance cash. And then the light purple is food stamps. So as you can see, the city of Longview has quite a few people that are accessing food stamps, which means that their incomes aren't quite enough that they can afford their housing, all of their utilities, and the food that they need. So that's the last slide I have here. Any questions?
Hello, I'm Sue. Okay, one question that comes to mind is this. Okay, we have 48 units, and they're occupied by people that have perhaps 4 or 6 people. As time goes by, will there be something to enforce not having people just stack up in those units because they know someone there, and now every unit has people sleeping on couches? Because I don't really think that's the greatest scenario for us. Sorry if it sounds selfish, but I think in order for it to continue to be successful, there has to be some sort of control on the occupancy, that they have to actually be on the books to be able to be there. Is there a plan for that?
There is, and that is exactly why that you partnering with Housing Opportunities. We are quite good at what we do, and we have occupancy policies, we have living standards that people have to go by. We are just very good at what we do. Most of our housing is subject to at least 2 or 3 inspections a year. One is by the property manager, and then our funders end up coming in 2 or 3 times a year. Usually with the special needs housing, or I say special needs, but something that's going to have supportive housing with it, supportive services with it. We do inspections twice a year, our property managers, so that we can keep track of who's in those units, who's not supposed to be in those units. We do background checks on all of our occupants. They have to pass a background check, so. Does that help?
My name's John. When you speak of people with disabilities, does that include mental?
Oh, yes. Yes, so his question was, does the disabilities include those folks that have mental disabilities? It's all folks with any type of disability, whether it's mental, or physical.
And I'll get to you, Cynthia, and then I have Jay, Cynthia, and then Robert.
Hi, this is Jay. So, first of all, wonderful job of gathering these statistics and presenting them. I think that's very interesting to look at and see these numbers. The first question that rose to my mind was, at this point, how engaged have the approving authorities in Longview been involved? In other words, have they looked at any tentative plans and given any tentative good feeling toward it, or have we not gotten to that stage yet?
I'm going to let Dexter answer that.
I can speak peripherally to that. Jennifer Westerman, the CEO of Hospital, has been meeting with city councilors and county commissioners, as well as state representatives, about possible funding sources from all 3 jurisdictions. So they know that this is coming. We've actually had recommendations where the city councilor will tell someone else who's interested in housing, and they'll call me because they knew that this land was being looked at. So they've been involved. They don't have the exact plans or anything like that because we're not there yet, but they have been informed and know it's coming. And some of them are ready to give us money.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Then we got Cynthia over here, and then we'll go to Robert.
Okay, my question is, even though this is sort of like a proposal coming out, in your units, you'll have a lot of people that have disabilities. Will they be made to handle people that are in wheelchairs, that cannot, that will be able to be for them, disability-wise? Because some units around town are not up to snuff, accessible for people with disabilities. Because I'm on HUD, and I had to have my apartment redone. So I'm just wondering, will that be in this plan?
So, the answer is yes. So, with new construction, anytime anyone's building an apartment building, no matter where in the country it is in the United States, for new construction, there's a requirement that I believe it's 5% have to be ADA accessible, have to be fully accessible for someone in a wheelchair. And the properties that we've always been involved with, we always greatly exceed that, and we usually have sort of two different standards. One is a fully accessible unit that someone in a wheelchair can move into, and they've got roll-in showers, and it's extremely accessible. Usually we do other things to make the other units adaptable easily. So for instance, in the bathrooms, it's not just drywall behind the drywall, there's backer, so people can put grab bars really easily. We make doorways wider, so if somebody, it's also good for moving furniture. We do a lot of things like that to try to make as many units easily accessible beyond just even the number of ADA units that we're required to do or that what HOSWA chooses to do. But that's a point of discussion. One thing I will say is that the neighborhood that we're in right now is, I would call it kind of a more suburban neighborhood. We've got a lot of single-family houses, and there are some two-story apartments in the neighborhood. We were talking about this project being a two-story building, and we usually don't put elevators in two-story buildings. If that was a priority of the congregation and HOSWA, that's something that we could do. We usually do that in every building that we do that's 3 stories or more, for obvious reasons. But just to say that out loud.
And I'm going to, right after Robert's question, I'm going to pause it so we can hear the rest of the presentation. I wonder if some of that might answer some questions as well.
So my specific question is about background checks. It's always good. It's a very positive thing to do background checks. My question is, what is the criteria that would disqualify a person based upon that background check?
So that comes up depending on who you're going to house. There are quite a few different things that will disqualify a person from being housed. Felonies, we try not to move folks in who have felonies, depending on the type of housing it is. Bad credit, we'll look at that. It just depends on the population that you decide to serve. So if you're serving families with children, we're going to look at credit, criminal, and rental history. So the credit, they could still be renters. We also have what's called conditional acceptance, where you can either have a co-signer or pay first and last month's rent. With the criminal, anything over 7 years, we really can't look at by state law. But yeah, we're gonna look at all of that stuff.
My concern about that is that...
Robert.
Yeah, okay. I'll cut it.
Just got like...
My concern about that is I believe that there's a discrimination thing about criminal things, felonies especially, because if the felony isn't related to a residential situation, we shouldn't consider that a disqualifier. I don't care whether it happened a year ago, 2 ago. If they've served their penalties, then once that's done, to me, they need a housing opportunity as long as it's not going to be injurious to the ability to live appropriately and respectfully in a neighborhood.
And you're correct, and we look at all of those things.
Okay, thank you.
The only thing I just wanted to add was that the standards at which HOSWA accepts people can be determined based on the property and as Kay said, who they serve. There are a few things that they can't, that there are a few lines because of the federal funding that they have. Usually it's methamphetamine production or is they just have we can't serve you. And they also can't usually owe money to the housing authority. As again, a federal requirement. Those are the ones that I know are kind of hard lines there.
I just want to add one thought here as we talk about what we've been talking about. Building homes for people that we're talking about turns out to be very expensive for a few reasons. One is this construction will have to be meeting the prevailing wage standards in the state, and also the conditions and the requirements and the facilities that will be built into this operation make the construction cost higher than you might expect.
Yeah, I think we're ready for Max is going to give us a presentation on the plan here. Okay.
Well, I'll introduce myself. So my name is Max Benson. I work for a nonprofit called Community Frameworks. We started over 40 years ago in the Spokane area, and we provide affordable housing and home ownership actually opportunities as well out in Spokane. And we have a second office out in Bremerton and do similar work there. And then we help other nonprofits and housing authorities around the state, build affordable housing as well. I'm not an architect, and we don't act as architects, but we do have a guy on staff who has a degree in that. So he kind of drew things up, and we use him to kind of get an idea as to what might be able to fit on a site. And again, we don't want, when we help organizations, we don't want buildings that are going to stand out in the neighborhood as something that doesn't fit in. So this was his sort of, they call it massing, is his concept. So I don't know, enough green area for kids to be able to play, so that fits in the neighborhood and provide good housing. Slide. This is I wanted to give kind of an introduction to some of the projects that we've done in the past, so we'll have some idea. This is a project that we're working with Katie and Jennifer on, with also on out in Pacific County, out in Raymond. It's a 30 units of housing downtown with a child care. We're working with the school district on the school district has a preschool, and that's going to be on the first floor. This is a professionally done picture of a senior project we did out in Spokane for a faith-based nonprofit for the senior housing out there. This is a project that the picture was taken before the landscaping was really in, which is a theme of our pictures. And it's 32 one-bedroom apartments, and about half the people that live there have some sort of disability, whether that's mental, physical, sensory, if you have a mobility problem, those are all disabilities. And there's also 20% of the people who are there are coming from homelessness. It's been a great project for us. The neighborhood's been happy with it, and the city's been happy. This is a project out in Port Townsend. It was a project we did for a domestic violence agency. It's not confidential. And it has their offices on the first floor, and then a few units of housing for families who can stay there for about 2 years to kind of get back on their feet after they sort of are trying to stabilize. This is a project we also did out in Spokane for families. It was sort of in an area they were trying to revitalize. I don't know if folks know Spokane, but this is sort of on the East Sprague area, which is always one of the rougher neighborhoods in the city. And we got rid of a used car lot and put in a bunch of townhouses and a small apartment building. And we got a award from the governor's office for collaborating with the businesses and doing a good job. So we're real proud of that. Okay. So I wanted to show some pretty pictures because the rest of it's real text heavy. So this was sort of what we were tasked with our feasibility study. Essentially what we were supposed to do is ask what it is HOSWA and the church wants to do, figure out what the site can actually handle, and then figure out what money is available to try to make that kind of vision come true. Next slide. And we looked at, some of the, we can't just build it and then leave it. We've also got to make sure we plan for the operations of it. So whether that's rental income coming in from the residents, whether some of them might have project-based vouchers, any other kind of operating subsidies. And then we also, so in that you're looking at what does it cost to build, how you operate it. We also look at pre-development, which is sort of how do we get to the point where we're building it. So we have a timeline, a budget, tasks, and then we're asked to make presentations like this. So the goals that we had heard from the church, and I realize there may be others, or some people might disagree with this, but this is sort of what we took forward, was that there was a concern about homelessness in the community, that just in general, that there's, as we kind of heard from the demographics, but I think everyone knows it, that there are folks who are need housing in the community, and we also had heard that there were members of the congregation who maybe were retired teachers and other things like this who may want to have an opportunity to volunteer if that was possible. HASWA, they have a couple of other goals. So, and this was in part because we're so close to an elementary school, but they had targeted, they thought families were an appropriate population for this project. They wanted the project to be an asset for the community, something that people in the community are proud of, and that serves the community for a long time. They want it to be, they're not trying to make money off of these projects, but the property has to operate in the black, because if it doesn't, if you plan for not operating in the black, when there's a real problem, you're going to have a real problem. So we always try to make sure everything, goes in a slightly positive direction, because otherwise you set yourself up for a problem. They'd like to go as quickly as possible. They see the need in the community. And we try to make things as simple as we can, even though sometimes this is a complicated business. Okay, this is the site. I'm not going to get into this too much, but the short version is we didn't see anything, because recently there was a rezoning, which was really helpful and necessary for this project to be developed into a real apartment building. And so that was great. The only issue we saw was, as many of you probably know, the Mid-Valley has got some challenging geology, which is not unusual for Longview as a whole. There's a lot of liquefaction, just near the river, and there's a lot of sand and a high water table. And that's doable, that doesn't stop anything. Obviously, plenty of things have been built out here and will continue being built out here. And the school district, it's public record, they gave us a copy of their, they call it a geotech study. A geologist comes out because of the work they're planning on doing at the elementary school. So we got to see kind of what they were recommending for that. So you can see the church and the parking lot where all was parked, and then you can see the site that we're talking about. So, from just a physical standpoint, one of the things that we would want to do is the church doesn't want to own housing, and we don't, and hospitals want to own the church, so you got to split those into two pieces. So our thought process here was you create, it's currently one parcel, you split it into two, one parcel being the blue, which is the church and the parking lot, second parcel being the red. It's a little shy of about almost 2.5 acres. The way that the city of Longview does that is called a short plat process. It triggers a SEPA, which is a big checklist and requires some public comment. That's part of the next steps you go through.
Max, what's the length along Pennsylvania?
I don't know off the top of my head. I could double check that. But it is a really great site from that perspective. It's really nice to have the long side along the street. It makes it easier for people doing construction. It makes it easier for all that layout and all that. So one of the ideas that was mentioned was looking at an early learning space. The state of Washington has realized that we've got a lot of kids and we don't have enough preschools and daycares and early learning. And we're currently working with Hostel on one out in Raymond, so we took a look at this. And we just thought it might be a good match because it's next to elementary school and we're talking families and everything. Lower Columbia Community College runs a program called the ECAP program, which is a program that provides early learning for 3 and 4 year olds, basically before kindergarten, maybe some 5-year-olds. We had a meeting with them, and I looked through the funding and talked with other folks. I'm not an expert on early learning, but there's some state funds that can pay for a portion of it, but they can't pay for the whole thing. And we were discouraged about trying to provide this on this site because we think they would cost about twice as much as what the state funds are available. The college has some other priorities. They don't want to do fundraising themselves because they want to do fundraising for other elements of the college, and they can't take on debt to take on some of it. So it made early learning really challenging. But I wanted to, we looked at it. If we were going to go forward, what we would recommend doing is not splitting the current property into 2 pieces. We recommend splitting it into 3 pieces. You know, one for the church in the parking lot, one for the early learning, and one for the housing. And that just makes life a lot easier when you're trying to build it. People got questions. Yes, Bill?
Incoming microphone.
Sorry.
I can speak loud.
Well, people can hear you from hearing aids, so.
Okay, my question is, the zoning in this area right now, is that single-family residence?
It is not.
It is not.
It is now called R3. So what it was until recently was called R2. And I have not memorized the City of Longview zoning code, but what the R2 allows, from the best of my recollection, were things like duplexes and some things like that. The R3 that recently, that this property just recently changed into allows apartment buildings, and they said there was, if I remember correctly, there was no maximum density, but they had a recommended density of around 30 units an acre. So that's 2- and 3-story apartment buildings, roughly.
Are there other 2- and 3-story apartment buildings in the area?
There are. I'm guessing that you've been going to church here for a while and know the neighborhood. There are some apartment buildings, and I'm right across over there. Thank you.
The fairways, right?
So there are some apartment buildings nearby, and when I take a look, I mean, I can see them standing in front of the site, you know, just kind of that way when you're standing in front of the site. So there are some apartment buildings obviously nearby, and like I said, one of the reasons we were looking at 2-story buildings was in part because we didn't want to stand out in the neighborhood. That was my suggestion. Again, we could look at potentially taller buildings. I did want to say, since you mentioned zoning, getting the money together is a challenge. But from a zoning perspective, you can right now, if a member of the congregation or anybody else said, hey, we've got a pile of money and we want to build some apartment buildings, you are allowed to build apartment buildings on this site. You've got the right zoning. You cannot actually build early learning spaces right now. Early learning spaces are permitted here with a conditional use permit, so you've got an extra hoop you've got to jump through, but it is possible.
And that wouldn't be that difficult. One of the things that we were fortunate about, or it smiled on us, good fortune, was the city was in the process of updating their comprehensive plan. And Paul was in contact with the city, and we were able to roll into that the change from R2 to R3. So we kind of held our breath for a while, and that happened. So we're in a pretty good situation right
Got one question.
So, twofold question. One is, how will this affect property values for the existing people that live here? Does that not, I'm sorry, but if I was living next to it and it brought my property value down, I believe in God, but I don't believe that I now have to give a third of my property value up.
Sure.
Okay, that's one part of the question. The other part is, what about the tax impact? is there going to be taxes on this property? So who becomes responsible for that?
Great questions. So I'm not an assessor or appraiser or economist or anything like that. And we get concerns about property values, people impacting the neighborhood and so forth. I can say that usually whenever we're building something new, you've got a new, good-looking apartment building in the neighborhood, and it looks like it's an asset. You know, and we try not to build anything that's not an asset. You know, you want something that's going to help improve the neighborhood. You walk around, you go, oh, looks like someone put some money into this neighborhood. You know, and the home builders, and I know the home builders are not a unbiased crowd, but they did a report, and I could provide the pastors a copy of it that says that that shows that they did some studies and that it does not negatively impact the neighborhoods. I think sometimes low-income housing, affordable housing, some of these programs have a bad reputation because of some history that the United States has. So in the West Coast here, you know, I can say, and this is all up and down, you know, the West Coast. From Bremerton, I know Seattle, I know Corvallis, but you know, a lot of the affordable housing that was built as World War II worker housing, and it was built to last for 10 years because the war went on more than 10 years. They figured we got a real big problem. And then at the end of the war, they just gave that housing to the housing authorities. It wasn't even built to last. And then they weren't given the money to maintain that housing. And I think in other parts of the country as well, a lot of times some housing was done in a way where they said, oh, house a bunch of really poor folks where you can't get a lot of rent, and then we're not going to give you money to maintain it. And that causes a problem. When we you know, work with groups like CASA or for our own, you know, housing that we provided, we make sure that the property operates in the black and we plan out for 20 years the maintenance and the repairs and a fudge factor for things that come up you don't expect, you know, to make sure the property does continue to look good for a long time. And regarding property taxes, any property taxes, basically, so hospital would own the property, usually as an LLC that they control, that owns it, and they're responsible for any property taxes, and they're responsible for everything. I mean, that's their job, both as property managers and as the controlling agent for the LLC. In Washington State, there are property tax exemptions for some affordable housing. You've got to be doing certain things. I'm guessing that this property would get a property tax exemption for what that's worth.
We're going to hold your questions. Let's get through all the information now and make sure we can see in the presentation.
So, you know, 2.5 acres, you could look at a universe of things. We looked at basically two options, a smaller option, a 24-unit option, and then we looked at a 48-unit option. So the 24-unit option we looked at as avoiding tax credit financing. So just essentially, you know, grants and loans from the state or the county, you know, those sorts of sources. And it was difficult. We couldn't figure out how to make that pencil. That's the short version of that. This was sort of what we were thinking, and what we were thinking was that at a later stage, like this could be phase 1, and at a later stage, you do phase 2. The blue building we thought would be kind of a community building, which where you have a property manager's office. It's where you have the maintenance guy's office and work area, and you also usually have a space there if someone does need to see a service provider, if they have a case manager or something like that, they can see that person having beer in front of their family or something. You know, they can do that. And I'm not going to speak. Katie's the expert on services, but there's a lot of other things you can do there. And then also sometimes you have a space for kids to have birthday parties or whatever else. Okay. So this was sort of the different sources that we looked at. Like I said, you can see we've got a red number there. We labeled GAP, which means money we GAP. We don't have an ability to pay for it. And so state policy is always changing, especially every 2 years when the legislature comes up with new priorities. But this was our best guess of where things are right now, and it's also based on what we saw. We spoke with a couple local general contractors about what it costs to build. About 80% of the cost of the project is just the wood and the guys swinging the hammers. This project would likely trigger both the state prevailing wage as well as Davis Bacon. So, you know, the carpenters, the plumbers, everybody's getting paid pretty well. And which is, we're supportive of because we want people to get a living wage. Sometimes we also bang our heads against the wall because it's a lot of paperwork. Next slide. So the advantages to this is it's simpler to finance, it's simpler to operate. The problems are it doesn't use the whole site. You know, you have a decent sized mortgage, and then there's a gap. We don't know how to come up with the rest of the money. So this was the 48 unit option, and again, you can kind of see what we're talking about here. So we've looked at a mix of 1 and 2 and 3 bedroom apartments. To be able to make this hit the state priorities as well as meet the needs in Longview, there's sort of a mix of sort of income levels, ranging from 60% of area median income, which is in this community is people, I don't have the number in front of me, but it's people, you know, working, you know, normal working class jobs, down to folks who are below 30% area median income, which you're scraping by. And then 24 of those units would be reserved for people experiencing homelessness, which includes people who are coming out of domestic violence situations, people who are at the risk of becoming homeless because of eviction, loss of income and so forth, people living in substandard living conditions. So I know when we were out in Raymond out there, you've got people out living in RVs and so forth, and I guess in that handout that the pastor provided, if you look at the last page of that, we've got some numbers from the school districts, and this is information that the Kelso and Longview school districts have to report to the state office of superintendent, and they've got over, I believe it was 700 students who Kelso and Longview are reporting as homeless right now, and that includes people sleeping on couches and so forth, but that is the definition we have to use here. We're not talking about chronic homelessness. We're talking about any of these sort of categories, which unfortunately there's a lot of locally. This project would use the whole site. You can see the sort of different sources of funds here. The State Housing Trust Fund comes out once a year. It's coming out next week for projects that were reapplied. Crossing our fingers. There's some local funds. Most of that are federal funds that are given to the county and so forth. The Federal Home Loan Bank is essentially where the banks borrow their money from. Think about funds. Tax credit equity is the biggest source by far. Next slide. This produces more housing, and we can pay for it potentially. It's a little bit more complicated, but that's, you know, you jump through the hoops you have to be able to build a project. Next slide. So I know that the church and the committee has been going through a process for a couple of years.
If I can interrupt, if you notice the difference between the 48 and the 24, in the 48 there was no gap.
Right. Yeah, we
and,
actually
and so it's curious as to why, but the funding will take a little bit longer in terms of time, 6 months or so. You know, anytime we talk about time, it's only a guess or a projection, but it takes a little bit longer to get that kind of funding, but there's no gap. So we're not looking at going out and having a bake sale to try to raise $868,000. Although your treats are wonderful.
I do like cookies. And most of the other baked goods. But just to answer the curious part, I mean, it's that this model, the 48-unit project, uses tax credits, and I think it was the Reagan administration actually passed this in the 80s, and it's become the largest source of funds for affordable housing. I'm not sure how, I guess it was because it was a tax cut, Reagan was supportive of it, or a tax credit, but anyway. I guess what you're saying, the congregation, this real estate land committee has been going on for a couple of years. I wanted to give you kind of a ballpark. This is we have certain things that happen every year, and you get a one shot at it that year. If it doesn't happen, you have to go another year. But usually we apply, we can go for local funds to be able to help sort of pay for the geologists and architects, all that kind of stuff. Usually in the spring, the county and so forth, we usually have the local jurisdictions will have their funding applications, so we get, it seems like, for me personally, a lot of money, but for a project like this, a small amount of money, but it shows the local support, which I think that we, could have for this project. And again, most of those funds are either federal funds or they just passed a new thing where essentially the state said, we're not going to keep all the sales tax money. You can keep some of it and spend it on affordable housing. We applied to the Federal Home Loan Bank. We applied to the State Housing Trust Fund in September. That's a really big deal in September. The state tells us if we get our awards in December, this year I believe it's going to be on the 18th. And then, assuming we got that award, we apply for the tax credits in January. They tell us in February. And then as soon as we find out that award, the next thing we do is we tell the architects just to start designing the building as best they can, as fast as they can. We don't usually pay the architects. We don't ask them to do a lot of work beforehand because if we don't have the money to build it, we don't want to have a full set of drawings. We just want to have what we call schematic drawings, just rough drawings. Because sometimes people end up paying for drawings and they're got a whole drawing for a building that they can't build, and that's a waste of money. And then sometimes we can start, I think there's actually another slide. Great. So then, tax credits in February. So often we try to close the financing in September or the first week of October. And that's usually when the land gets moved to LLC, it's when all the loans, it's like when we sign a mortgage kind of a thing. And then usually the next day the general contractor starts construction. I put an asterisk next to it here. And I did that because I don't know if September or October is a good time to start construction with the high-water table we have here. So it's possible that might move to maybe a March, but I would defer to the local expertise on that front. In any case, it takes about a year to build a building. That's our experience universally. And then usually it takes 2 or 3 months to lease it up once the construction's done. You're crossing your fingers a little to get one leased up right now. Next slide. So this is sort of our next steps. Essentially, we just need to know if we want to go forward. We would have a pre-development meeting with the city just to make sure there's nothing we don't know or anything like that. It's pretty straightforward. Site controls means something like either a purchase and sale agreement or something of that nature. Because we want to have, so for a group like us, we want to have something that says we're all moving in the same direction. If we get the money together, we can do this. They don't want to own the property right now but they want to know that if they get the money to build it, that it's there, that it's not going to get pulled out from underneath them later. And then we start applying for funds. Next slide.
That's it.
I have some multiple questions, and
I'll do my best.
they're all kind of related. So I just would like it reiterated, it was said earlier, if we go through all this, what then is the ongoing responsibility of our congregation? How much influence do we have at this point, whatever that point is, to, for example, if we want to make sure that it's only local builders who build, can we input that we'd like it to be a green build, with solar panels and things, knowing that that increases cost, but it might also get us some funding for energy, whatever. And then, because I'm a teacher, the impact of possible numbers on that school, and how that's compensated for, et cetera. So
That was a multiple-part question. I'm going to start off with the back, and if I forget any pieces, just thank you. Jennifer, who's on vacation right now, she's the head of the housing authority, the Passoa. She has been in conversations with the superintendent, and I don't know the impact of the school. She is in conversation with them. I did not hear anything that they were particularly concerned. They are also renovating it, so there might be a possibility of them compensating for this. It is also only 48 apartments, so there's that. Regarding ongoing responsibility, essentially, unless there is something written down, some sort of specific agreement that would cause the church to have ongoing responsibility, there would be none. I guess in all of the projects that I've done, I can't think of any examples. The only examples I can ever think of are like, we did a senior project right next door to another senior project, and they had an agreement that they could use each other's parking lots. So they had an agreement that they would maintain it together. So unless there's something specific like that, there is no ongoing responsibility. With regard to things like green building, we've done a bunch of it. I put solar panels on a bunch of properties. Usually, it's if we have more money left over at the end. But we've been pretty good about saving up, making sure we have some money left over at the end. That is, I know that the hospital is supportive of those sorts of things. If there was, for the church or the congregation to have any requirements with regard to that, that would have to be something discussed between the congregation and HOSWA, and they would have to agree to whether that was a local builder or green building or any, whatever it was, that had to be something that everybody agrees upon.
So we're in the midst of, or we're starting the negotiation of what that transfer looks like, and in that will be things like, if you don't get the funding, the land reverts, or it'll, because of the tax credits, it'll always be housing for low income up to X number of years. So part of that transfer agreement might be questions we're considering, like parking and sharing parking spaces, and so we can include some of those things in that agreement that's coming forward.
I understand the cost to the church.
Ron's got a question, so let's.
Okay, I just wanted to add.
You have to use the
Okay, I'm just going to be very quick, is that my understanding is the cost to the church is the loss of the property, and I think what we've heard, at least, is that we're willing to do that.
Yeah, sorry, so the proposed plan that we're bringing would be to donate the land, so that that doesn't add to the costs of the already expensive building, and that would be our sort of donation towards it. And we have zero responsibility in terms of upkeep, finances, taxes, which is something we currently want to not have. And then in terms of ongoing partnerships, speaking with Jennifer, she'd always be excited to collaborate about how we might partner with them once they're up and running, and how we can support them. But nothing official.
I did not yield to the gentleman, so we can. I'm wrong. For those geologically challenged, is the cost of either draining the swamp or raising the land included in the total cost of the? I just want to know if it's in the cost.
Sure, that is the cost, to be clear, and I'm not a geologist, but I believe they don't have plans on actually dealing with it either of those two ways. I believe that the way that they deal with it is, I believe they talk about geopiers, essentially providing stone columns, all the way down to bedrock, which is 40, 50 feet down. Yeah. But it was, the cost of that is about $300,000. That was I spoke with an architect, I spoke with a local builder, and I spoke with another person, and they all said, yeah, about $300,000. So I said, okay, cool, that's great. Everybody's coming up with the same number. This is good.
Okay, I'm George. I want to talk back specifically about your design.
Yes.
This is a south-facing road. So I'm talking about solar panels on the property. And I would like to have your design have one roof face south and completely put on solar panels. The parking lot could have solar panels on them. I'm looking at a we have to do something for the climate. And I think this congregation would support that.
So I know Jennifer is a big, she feels similarly to you. Regarding the design, so the role that I usually play is sort of like a project manager, just getting the money together, getting all the parties together, and seeing the thing through and getting it done. Like I said, we have a guy who is trained as an architect on our staff, and so people like to see something visual. If all you saw was a bunch of text, it'd be tougher. So this was just our initial concept. This is any architectural. We would hire an architect to do real design, and usually we would do some public meetings. Sometimes they call it, that's a fancy word, they call it a charrette, where they have an architect and they have people provide input and things like what you just said to figure out how to best do it. But we wanted to have kind of an initial kind of concept idea of this is roughly what you would fit on there. And obviously you could have it oriented a different way. And we put a lot of solar on. We've done everything from having it on roofs. We've had it on, we worked on a senior project where we had covered parking. This was out in more snow country. And we put solar panels on the parking structures. We've done a lot of that.
Yeah, so that's something we can continue to add into the plan. This is really just a sketch to give us something visual. It's nothing concrete. And we hear you.
My point that you can use this property to the best ability to put in solar panels. I think the power from the solar panels would pay for maintenance and occupation.
The power. I really like solar panels on the project because it is sort of a hedge against the cost. Energy keeps going up in cost, and so it's a hedge against that inflation. So I do like to try to do what we can.
I'm Jim. Positive. My reaction to the whole proposal, my director for taking the project, but I'm going to sound like in the renderings or in this package that was handed out, or the one that's behind you, the existing church is a blank box.
Yes.
A little more than an acre, 1.2, something like that, whatever it is. Okay. Are we comfortable, this is to the church members and to the session, are we comfortable that all of our foreseeable needs are met within that boundary, including parking?
Yes.
I'll have some.
Jim, do you want to jump on that or get an answer?
Yes, back there for Ron, but that's an issue you decided initially is, are we going to be a mega church someday? Or, what's the immediate needs of the community and how we can serve them? But I will defer to Ron on this.
Well, it's not ultimately a session decision, but I can say on behalf of session that we have received the feasibility study and the proposal as it exists at this point, and the session did vote to support moving ahead with this proposal and signed a resolution of our support. It is a congregational decision. We feel that there's lots of parking available to us, even as we fill our building and the parking lot gets full. And if we need to expand the building, there remains room for an expanded building on the site that would remain here. If we become that mega church, we're not going to be here in any circumstance. Again, my answer is yes.
Yeah, I'll say this is a discussion we've had since the beginning with the land committee and on session. The most immediate concern for us right now is parking as we start to fill the parking lot. So So that's a potential agreement we could have with them. Also, there's a school right next door that is always empty on Sundays. We could, I think, pretty easily work out a plan with them, as well as there being street parking. So parking, I think we're okay. In terms of land, we do have options to increase or change the size of our current worshiping situation. Or there's other options of going to 2 services or other options that are out there. I think they're very feasible for us.
Excuse me, my name is John. I would just like to add to this conversation that's going on. You know, it's not inconceivable that...
Still not close enough,
Oh,
John.
I'm sorry. It's not inconceivable that this congregation could max out over 200 members in the next 10 years. And I think that needs to be taken into consideration as far as parking and expansion. There are some plans, I think, somewhere in the building for future architectural drawings. Were those considered?
I've seen those plans, and actually they say to increase this direction, which we will currently still own. In terms of max capacity for this room, it's currently set at about 170. Obviously that's a standing room. So we would have to double in size for our worship service, which if we continue our current rate over Liz and I's last 3 years, which has been fantastic, it'll take at least 10 years before we max out this room. And that's if everyone's still showing up every Sunday. And then there's still other options of splitting into 2 services or pushing out that wall or pushing it that direction or pushing it this way as well.
My other question is, I know Postman has a wonderful reputation. I think the congregation would like some assurance that this is going to be managed well through the years, on-site management. We don't want this to become a white elephant, an embarrassment to not only the church but the community. So maybe you can speak to that.
John,
Let me speak to that, because we did visit sites, and we visited specifically one site in Woodland and had a tour, and it's a HOSWA managed operation, and we were impressed. I mean, you go into a parking lot, you don't see any cars being repaired and you don't oil spots. They had wonderful programs for the residents. They even had a program where residents they had a savings fund. Some of the rent went to their savings fund, and eventually the money was given to them if they complied with their case management concept, and they benefited from it. I'm really impressed, and I do not see this being any different than any of their other managed properties.
Well, I really...
Will there be a resident case manager on site?
Yes.
It's a perfect question, John, because I'm going to segue to Katie, who has a couple more slides about the wraparound services that Oswald provides, as well as looking at a couple other buildings they currently run and manage, so she can speak directly to those questions. You want to go from there? Sorry.
So currently we own about 13 properties in 2 different counties. We manage 4 properties in Pacific County for the Joint Pacific County Housing Authority. Just a couple more slides that I have. One shows that, so we do have some supportive housing that we own and manage. And these are some of the partners that we work with. So Phoenix House, the service provider is Counts Family Health Center, and that is housing for parents with children exiting drug treatment programs. Stratford Arms, the Veterans Integration Program, which is part of Housing Opportunities, provides the services there, and that housing is for homeless veterans. Lilac Place Apartments, that's the one that Jim actually came down and toured. That is 75% set aside for homeless, and we actually provide the services there. So we're kind of getting our feet wet in that. And then for Pacific County, we also manage some units over there for them. Pacific Pearl is, we have 10 units set aside for domestic violence units there. It's a 16-unit complex. And the services are provided by Crisis Support Network over there. And then Driftwood Point Apartments, we're just finished building in October. And we are in the process of filling that unit up. 75% homeless, 27 units. And Coastal Community Action Program provides services there. So we do this a lot. We try to be very good partners in the community that can either provide the services themselves or recur the services out to whatever the people might need, so. And then the last slide is kind of a performance measure for us. So these are some of the properties. We operate on a October through September fiscal year. And you only need to pay attention to the numbers at the far right. That's our occupancy percentage. So industry standard is usually around 95, 96%. We manage our properties at 99% occupancy. So that speaks to our management. We take it very seriously what we do. And then even the units that we manage in Pacific County, they're also averaging 99% occupancy. So we don't mess around with vacancies.
Katie, I'm sorry, you said something earlier that maybe I misunderstood. You said something to the effect that it depends on what population you want served. Is that a decision that you're expecting from us? Is that something we do jointly? How do you arrive at that?
In this case, it's going to be jointly. We wouldn't want to serve a population that the church said, no, we don't want to serve that population. So we have been discussing the different populations, the needs of the community. So it will be a joint discussion.
It's also related because funding will also.
So we're currently looking.
Yeah, it's a three-legged stool, if you will, Hoswell, the church, and also the funding, because some of the funding will have very stringent requirements in terms of who can be housed there, so, or who has to be, the housing has to be made available to certain categories. But that's all part of the process that we're going to agree on before we present it to the congregation.
Robert here again, if we're done with that question. So I appreciate all the folks that have worked so hard. Just going to try to kind of add another piece that I think you need to understand about this congregation. This congregation, in my perspective, has been all about making sure we serve people who've been discriminated against, who find it hard to find housing, to find it that, as well as helping as a major spearhead, I think, for serving homeless people, whether they're housed or whether they're on the street, doesn't matter. We try very hard to serve that. And so along with that, one of the focuses of this congregation has been to work with the Washington Women's Correctional Institution, PERDI, to help them move out into communities in a healthy sort of way. So I just wanted you folks to know, as partners with us, that to me, that's one of the things, along with issues of environment and things like that we're concerned about. So hopefully you can match that with funding sources and yourself. And thank you so much, because as this moves forward, I really truly pray and hope that our desires will come true with this thing, and that the real services that are necessary, because there's lots of different kinds of services for homeless people that are needed.
Are there more questions? I recognize also this is a lot of information coming at you right now, and so I tried to reduce the feasibility study to the handout to show you the most pertinent information for our congregation. I hope you're able to look at that. If you have questions in the coming days and weeks, feel free to reach out. Let us know what those are. We've spent a lot of time talking about this, and I know a lot of this is new for you. So if you want to ask any questions whatsoever, please ask us, and we'll try and get back to you. Going forward, the plan will be the land committee, on behalf of session, is going to work out a purchase agreement. However we structure that, per se, that will have some caveats into it, in terms of the transfer of title and things like that, as well as different other options we've talked about today as well. So we'll be working on that, and our hope is to bring that to you at the January 26th congregational meeting for a vote. That would be the vote that we would make to donate the property. If we don't have the information ready by then, we'll have to have a special congregational meeting, which we just need 2 weeks to give you a heads up for that. So that would be potentially later in February. The goal being to have that piece done before the March 16th, I think, Presbytery meeting, because we own the land on behalf of the Presbytery, so when we transfer the property, we have to make a decision, and then the Presbytery has to make a decision. I've been laying the groundwork with them so they know what's coming, but that will be happening in March for that final vote to go forward, while they continue to work out the funding options and those other options that you saw before you. So please ask your questions. Thank you all for spending this wonderful time with us. I know it was a little bit long, but I thank you for making the time, and I hope you have a great afternoon and lunch, and I'm going to close us with a word of prayer. Jesus, we remember at Christmas the time where Mary and Joseph did not have a place to lay their head, when there was no room at the inn. You were born in a manger, in a place where the animals lived, homeless. You experienced being a refugee in your first few years of life. You experienced immigration. You experienced violence throughout your life. So God, we ask that as a church, as followers of you, seeking Christ's way and welcoming all people, that we would be doing everything we can in our power to move that direction, that you would give us wisdom and discernment, that you would give us compassion and a heart to do your will, to follow you, to clothe the naked, to feed the hungry, to give water for the thirsty, to house the homeless. Be with us all as we go forward today. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Thanks, everybody.